My name is Jhon, and you're watching Plane Crashed, where the skies hold stories that the world can never forget. Tonight, we dive into one of aviation's greatest mysteries, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a flight that vanished without a trace, carrying 239 souls, leaving behind a silence so loud it still echoes through the corridors of aviation history. This isn't just a story about a missing plane. It's about confusion, heartbreak, and the desperate search for answers beneath endless oceans. What really happened that night over the South China Sea? Let's uncover the truth that never landed. The night of March 8, 2014, began like any other at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, with passengers boarding, engines roaring, and crew members preparing for another long-haul journey across the night sky. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a Boeing 777-200ER, stood gleaming on the tarmac, its white fuselage reflecting the shimmering runway lights. The air was calm, the weather clear, and everything pointed to a routine 6-hour flight to Beijing. On board were 239 people, 227 passengers and 12 crew members, families, business travelers, students and tourists, each carrying their own hopes, destinations and stories. At 12:41 a.m., the plane lifted off the ground, climbing smoothly into the night, its lights fading into the darkness. The captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, an experienced and well-respected pilot, exchanged routine greetings with air traffic control. The co-pilot Farik Abdul Hamid, young and ambitious, handled the radio communications. Everything was normal. The aircraft leveled off at its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, heading northeast over the South China Sea. The passengers likely settled into their seats, dimmed the cabin lights, and prepared to rest for the overnight flight. Flight attendants began their rounds, serving drinks, checking seatbelts, making sure everyone was comfortable. Nothing seemed out of place. Then at 1:19 a.m. came the last known communication from the cockpit. The air traffic controller in Kuala Lumpur handed the flight off to Vietnamese control, and Captain Zahari responded calmly, "Good night." Malaysian 370. It was an ordinary phrase, one used thousands of times every night in skies around the world. But it would soon become chillingly significant. It was the last time anyone ever heard from MH370. Within minutes, the plane disappeared from radar screens. Controllers in Vietnam waited for it to check in, but silence filled the airwaves. They tried to reach the pilots, no response. Malaysian controllers attempted to re-establish contact, but the aircraft had simply vanished. It was as though it had been erased from existence. At first, confusion reigned. Maybe there was a communication glitch, maybe the aircraft had strayed off course, or perhaps a minor technical issue had disrupted the signal. Such problems happen occasionally and are usually resolved within minutes. But as time passed, anxiety grew. The plane was no longer visible on civilian radar, and no transponder signals were being received. When the automated radar blip disappeared, air traffic controllers began to realize that something far more serious was unfolding. The first signs of panic emerged when MH370 failed to appear in Vietnamese airspace as scheduled. Authorities on both sides began calling each other, trying to determine where the aircraft had gone. There were no distress calls, no emergency messages, no signs of trouble. The flight had simply gone dark. What no one knew at the time was that military radar in Malaysia had detected something unusual. A plane turning sharply off its planned route, veering westward, crossing the Malay Peninsula, and heading out over the Andaman Sea. The transponder had been switched off, suggesting a deliberate act. Whoever was at the controls of MH370 knew exactly what they were doing. The aircraft flew on, invisible to civilian radar, but traceable through faint military echoes. It climbed, descended, and changed direction several times in a pattern that would later puzzle investigators. Then somewhere over the open ocean, the radar contact was lost completely. By dawn, families waiting in Beijing began to grow restless. The flight was overdue. The arrival board still displayed delayed, but the truth was slowly spreading. MH370 was missing. As the hours passed, the situation turned from confusion to crisis. Search and rescue operations began immediately in the South China Sea, where the plane was last seen. Dozens of ships and aircraft from Malaysia, Vietnam, China, and other nations scoured the waters, looking for debris, oil slicks, anything that could point to the fate of the missing jet. But there was nothing. No wreckage, no floating life vests, no emergency signals. It was as if the plane had vanished into thin air. Families gathered at airports, desperate for news, clinging to hope. In Kuala Lumpur, airline officials struggled to provide answers they didn't have. The media swarmed and speculation ran wild. Within the first 24 hours, the disappearance of Flight 370 had become a global mystery. Behind the scenes, investigators began piecing together what little data they had. The sudden loss of transponder signals, the unexplained route change, and the total silence from the cockpit suggested something more than a simple malfunction. A catastrophic event might explain the loss of communication, but not the deliberate course deviation that followed. Someone on that plane had manually altered its path. Satellite data provided the next major clue. Even though the aircraft's transponder was off, it was still handshaking with satellites, sending automated signals known as pings. These pings allowed investigators to trace its approximate path for several more hours after disappearing from radar. What they discovered was shocking. MH370 had continued flying for at least 7 hours, far beyond the point anyone expected. Instead of heading north toward Beijing, it had flown south into one of the most remote areas of the Indian Ocean. This revelation shifted the entire focus of the search. The South China Sea was abandoned, and efforts moved to the vast southern Indian Ocean, an area so remote that few ships ever passed through it. The discovery deepened the mystery. If the plane had crashed due to a technical failure, how could it have flown for so long without contact? If it had been hijacked, where were the demands? The lack of debris or signals was unprecedented. The disappearance seemed to defy logic. As investigators retraced the final moments of radar contact, they noticed subtle details that hinted at human intervention. The altitude changes, the precise turns along navigational waypoints, all of it indicated someone with aviation expertise was at the controls. Whether that was Captain Zahari, his co-pilot, or an unknown intruder remained a matter of fierce debate. The families of those on board watched helplessly as days turned into weeks, and the ocean offered no answers. Governments faced mounting pressure, and conflicting reports fueled anger and confusion. Every day brought new theories, each more speculative than the last. The disappearance of MH370 wasn't just a tragedy. It was a failure of understanding, an event that challenged everything we thought we knew about modern aviation. A Boeing 777 is one of the most advanced and reliable aircraft in the world, equipped with multiple communication systems, safety redundancies, and fail-safes. How could it simply vanish in the 21st century in an age of satellites and global tracking? The question haunted the world. While search operations continued, the world watched live coverage of planes and ships sweeping the ocean, deploying sonar equipment and scanning thousands of square miles. But the more they searched, the deeper the mystery became. It wasn't until months later that the first possible clue appeared. A piece of debris washed ashore on Réunion Island, thousands of miles from the suspected crash site. It was part of a wing, later confirmed to belong to MH370. This discovery brought both relief and sorrow. It proved the plane had indeed ended its journey in the ocean, but it offered no clarity about how or why. In the early days after the disappearance, investigators had entertained every possible scenario: catastrophic failure, fire, hijacking, decompression, pilot suicide, but each theory left questions unanswered. The deliberate disabling of communication systems, the flight's strange path, and the total silence from those on board painted a chilling picture of something intentional. Yet without the flight recorders, the black boxes, or the main wreckage, nothing could be proven. As night fell over the Indian Ocean and the search expanded, one fact became painfully clear: this was no ordinary aviation incident. It was the beginning of one of the most perplexing mysteries in history. The disappearance of MH370 shattered the illusion of certainty that surrounded modern air travel. It showed that even with all our technology, a massive commercial airliner could still vanish into the dark, leaving behind only questions, grief, and an ocean of silence. The night that began as a routine journey from Kuala Lumpur became a haunting chapter in aviation history, one that would echo across the world for years to come. A story of 239 lives, a vanished aircraft, and the unrelenting human search for truth that still continues to this day. As the days stretched into weeks and then months, the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 transformed from a shocking tragedy into one of the most baffling mysteries in modern history, a puzzle that drew in nations, scientists, conspiracy theorists, and grieving families all searching for the same answer. What really happened to those 239 people who vanished into the night sky? The ocean became both a graveyard and a riddle, its surface calm and endless while beneath. Perhaps lay the key to everything. In the first frantic days, optimism drove the search. Maybe the plane had made an emergency landing somewhere remote. Maybe communication systems had failed and survivors were waiting to be rescued. But as time passed and no signals, no beacons, and no wreckage emerged, hope began to fade and dread began to take hold. The story that unfolded became more complex than anyone could have imagined. Radar data and satellite pings suggested that MH370 had flown for hours after losing contact, heading southwest across the vast Indian Ocean, a desolate expanse with no radar coverage, no islands, and no witnesses. Experts puzzled over the data, trying to make sense of the so-called handshakes between the aircraft and an Inmarsat satellite orbiting high above the Earth. Those signals didn't reveal exact locations but offered faint arcs of possible flight paths, each one a haunting curve stretching across the planet like ghost trails. When analysts studied the final burst of data, they concluded that the aircraft had most likely run out of fuel and plunged into the sea somewhere along a lonely stretch of ocean west of Australia. It was a hypothesis, not a conclusion, but it became the basis for one of the most expensive and exhaustive searches in aviation history. For years, fleets of ships equipped with advanced sonar combed the seabed, mapping mountains and trenches thousands of meters deep. Underwater drones swept the darkness, searching for any sign of twisted metal or the distinct hum of the black boxes. But time and again, the ocean gave nothing back. Each false lead, each empty scan deepened the frustration and heartbreak. Families waited in hotel rooms and press halls, clutching photos of their loved ones, desperate for closure. The world watched in disbelief as technology, so trusted and advanced, seemed powerless to find a single trace of a massive airliner. Then came the theories, wild, complex, and sometimes chilling. Some experts suggested a catastrophic fire or decompression that incapacitated everyone on board, while the plane continued flying on autopilot until fuel exhaustion. Others believed in a deliberate act. Perhaps the captain had taken the plane on a final, fatal journey, steering it toward oblivion. A few argued that MH370 had been hijacked, its communications deliberately cut before being diverted to a secret airstrip. There were even more far-fetched ideas involving remote hacking, stolen cargo, or military interference. Each theory had fragments of logic, but none could fully explain every detail. Governments released statements, investigations opened and closed, but the truth remained buried somewhere beneath the waves. The absence of answers became a wound that refused to heal. For the families of the victims, the uncertainty was unbearable. How do you mourn when you don't know where or why someone is gone? They gathered in vigils, lit candles, and demanded transparency. Some accused officials of hiding information, others pleaded for the search to continue at all costs. Across the world, experts argued on television panels, while the internet buzzed with speculation. Every shred of new data, every possible debris find, every radar glitch was dissected and debated. The search for MH370 wasn't just physical. It became psychological, emotional, almost spiritual. It represented humanity's battle against the unknown, a desperate attempt to bring logic to something that defied reason. And then, after 16 long months, a breakthrough came, small but monumental. A piece of aircraft debris washed ashore on Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean, a wing fragment known as a flaperon. Tests confirmed it belonged to MH370. It was the first physical evidence that the aircraft had indeed ended its flight in the Southern Ocean. But even that discovery brought as many questions as it answered. Why was the wreckage so far from the primary search zone? What had happened in those final hours? More debris followed. Small parts found on the coasts of Mozambique, Madagascar, and Tanzania, each piece drifting across thousands of miles, each carrying silent testimony to the aircraft's fate. Yet without the main wreckage or flight recorders, the truth remained locked away. The official investigation released a detailed report, yet it ended not with certainty, but with a haunting admission. They did not know what caused the disappearance. It was the first time in modern aviation that a major jet had vanished without explanation. For the aviation industry, this was more than a mystery. It was a wake-up call. How could a Boeing 777, one of the most sophisticated aircraft ever built, go missing in an era of satellites and real-time tracking? The incident exposed glaring weaknesses in global air traffic monitoring. Governments and aviation bodies began discussing new systems to ensure no aircraft could ever vanish again. Real-time data streaming from black boxes, improved satellite communication, and international cooperation for remote area tracking. But for those connected to MH370, technological reform was little comfort. They wanted truth, accountability, closure. Some families believed the full story was being suppressed, that crucial radar data or military surveillance information had been withheld. Others focused their anger on Malaysia Airlines and government agencies, accusing them of incompetence in the crucial first hours when confusion and miscommunication delayed the search. For others still, grief turned to quiet resignation, the acceptance that the ocean had claimed their loved ones and would never give them back. As the years passed, the case of MH370 became a symbol of loss, of mystery, of human fallibility. Documentaries, books, and reports revisited every frame of radar data, every satellite ping, every second of cockpit audio. Pilots recreated the flight path in simulators, engineers analyzed systems for weaknesses, and psychologists explored the mental state of those at the controls. Each attempt to uncover the truth only seemed to deepen the fog surrounding it. Some pointed to Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a man described as both professional and passionate, yet possibly burdened by personal struggles. Data from his home flight simulator suggested he had practiced a route over the southern Indian Ocean eerily similar to MH370's final path. Was it coincidence or a dark rehearsal? Investigators debated endlessly, but no conclusive motive could ever be proven. Others rejected the pilot's suicide theory entirely, insisting the data could be interpreted in countless ways and that no evidence of intent existed beyond speculation. The mystery became an abyss of interpretations, each one as haunting as the last. The ocean floor, meanwhile, guarded its secrets. The official search was eventually suspended in 2018 after covering more than 120,000 square kilometers of seabed, an area roughly the size of Pennsylvania, without success. A private company later took up the search under a no-find, no-fee deal, using advanced sonar technology to scan previously unexplored areas. But even that mission ended in frustration. The sea remained silent. Today, the disappearance of MH370 continues to haunt both aviation experts and ordinary people alike. It represents a chilling reminder that even in an age when every movement can be tracked, something as large as a passenger jet can still vanish without a trace. The case has been compared to a modern-day Bermuda Triangle mystery, an unsolved enigma that defies technology and human understanding. For the families, the years have not dulled the pain. Some continue to campaign, to demand that new searches resume, clinging to the belief that the wreckage and the answers are still out there. Others have found fragile peace, believing their loved ones rest somewhere in the deep, beyond the reach of light or sound. And for the world, MH370 remains a symbol of the unknown, a story that captures the fragility of human control against the vast, unpredictable forces of nature and fate. What happened that night remains one of aviation's darkest riddles. Was it an accident, an act of malice, or a tragic convergence of events? The truth may still lie thousands of meters below, encased in darkness, waiting for the day someone finds it. Until then, the questions echo across the waves, mingling with the wind and the water, whispering the same haunting refrain that has echoed since 2014. Where is MH370? In the end, the story of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 is more than an unsolved mystery. It's a reminder of how fragile certainty can be in a world built on technology and trust. 239 people boarded a plane one quiet night, expecting to reach their destination by morning. Yet they disappeared into the silence of the skies, leaving behind only grief, speculation, and the unrelenting pursuit of truth. The ocean may still hold their secrets, but the world will never stop asking, never stop searching, and never stop remembering. Because MH370 is not just a flight number, it's a question that still hangs in the air, unanswered, echoing through time.